set out with this agenda, but she investigated the causes, if you like, of 15 tragic deaths of young people. And one of the conclusions she came up with is that affection is no longer enough. That it makes a difference if kids get really clear guidance about right and wrong. She found that the great majority of the young people, not all, but the great majority of the young people who died tragically had actually been involved in drug use before the event. Very tough. True story. The deputy at Redfield told me this story. He said that he was with his family. His wife was doing the dinner, and she was preparing the carrots. Her little boy Jamie was upstairs, and Jamie had been given a timeout because he had used the F word. He's only 4 years old, but he has big brothers. And finally, he came down from his room where he had been given his time out, and he said to his mum, "Mum, I don't want to live in this family anymore." And his mum, calm as a cucumber, she just kept going, and she said, "Oh, mate, where are you going to live?" And he said, "It's okay. You guys are going to have to move out." So she tries another reason. She says, "But where are you going to live?" And he says, "It's okay. I'll take a banana from the bowl. I'll be okay." And then finally, she tries her ace, and her ace is affection. She says, "Mate, who's going to give you hugs?" And he looks really troubled, and he says, "Oh, Mum, I think I made a mistake." In the end, Mum and Dad have to be experts at affection, and every child receives affection in different ways. Along with affection, we need challenge. We need high but reasonable expectations. Children rise to our expectations. It's a rule in the classroom. It's a rule also in families. Children rise to our expectations. Father Chris Riley is famous in Australia because he runs a big program to get kids off the streets. And he came and he spoke to the families at Redfield on one occasion. And that itself was very impressive because you can see he's so driven and dedicated to what he's doing. But he just was blunt. He just said to the parents, "Have the courage to demand greatness from the children in your care." The gentleman who started the Australian Institute of the Family is a guy called Don Edgar. And he, at one stage, I was at a presentation he gave, and he said, all good parenting comes back to one graph. On the vertical axis, you have affection, and on the horizontal axis, you have challenge and demand. And he said, you've got to be high on both. If you're just high on affection and you don't challenge your kids, they will not be life ready. And if you're high on demand but low on affection, you'll drive your kids away. So it's a very simple idea, but it's a very good idea. And then let's look at our own example. One friend of mine, young couple, the wife said to me, "Whenever my husband loses his temper, I freeze because I think of his father and how his father loses his temper so easily." We recycle the example that we have received very often. And of course, this can be good, or it can be also very damaging. So we have to make sure that the example that we give is effective at all times. Look at this. This is a 10-month-old child, and he's putting his father, he's going to put his favorite toy in front of him.
"Isaac, crawl over and get the Lucy. Crawl over and get the Lucy. Come and get the Lucy. Ready? Sure you don't want the Lucy? Okay, what about the phone? Oh, you want the phone?
Does that worry you? Isn't it amazing that his favorite toy is not as much of a motivation as the phone of his father. Why is this? Part of it is doing as his father does, but also there's something else happening in our brains. And we know a little bit more about this now. We know how we have this automatic capacity to act in ways that we've seen, and we imitate behaviors without even thinking about them. And I suppose that's the emphasis, that it's an automatic circuit that we have. That's how we learn a tennis forehand, but it's also, in the end, the explanation for why it's so easy for children to learn. And imitation is a good thing. Imitation is a way of learning, but how easy it is for children to learn, because whatever they see, they can learn from. So it's really important that whoever or whatever spends time with your child, that's positive. I mean, it'd be a tragedy, wouldn't it, that Homer Simpson is more influential on a child, or whoever their child is watching, on a screen, than the father himself. Big time. What about customs of communication? Johanna there in the picture is one of the young Australian mums who went across to the London conference with us last year. But look at the quote. Mrs. Cosgrove raised a family of boys in a very humble farmhouse, so humble that it had a dirt floor in the kitchen. Oberon is a very cold area of central New South Wales. And she started telling me this, and I just thought she was going to say, hey, when one of my sons comes home, I ask him what's the matter if I think something's going on. But she said, when one of my sons comes home and I realize something is on his mind, I put on the kettle and I tell him a good story. And then when he loosens up, he says what's on his mind. Makes you think, doesn't it? Customs of communication. What customs of communication are you establishing so that your child really looks forward to it when you sit on the bed, or you go to Macca's together, or you have something that you do every day, or daddy-daughter dates every week? What are the things what are the customs? Because it may take quite a number of get-togethers, if you like, before your child really opens their heart. But if you and your child don't open your heart to each other, you're out of the game. You can no longer correct a teenager in a way that's going to be at all constructive. What you need to do is to educate your teenager so that your teenager opens their heart to you and you open your heart to them. And how do you know what your teenager is doing online? What do you know what your child is doing online if they don't tell you? You may have an effective filtering system, but when they're at someone else's place, how do you know what they're doing, what they're thinking, unless they tell you? So you need customs of communication. I love going back to these old quotes from Homer or from Aristotle, because it shows us that the principles of parenting haven't changed, that there's something about human nature that we all need to know, in this case, what's right and wrong. And children who don't know the difference between right and wrong are children at risk, big time. And it's incumbent on you as a parent not to leave this up to somebody else, but it's obviously your job to teach your child what's right and what's wrong. In a class, I remember vividly talking to year 3 children. I'm a secondary teacher by background, so secondary teachers normally go to water when they're in front of primary kids. But in any case, I was teaching a year 3 group, which is boys about 7. And I was telling them a story I'd made up on the spot about Rufus and Brutus. Rufus is the guy that always gets it right, and Brutus always learns the hard way. And maybe 9 years later in the playground, a senior student came up to me. He told me a story that I had told him in class 9 years before. And then he asked me what happened next. And I had forgotten the story the day after I made it up. But he had remembered this word for word for 9 years. And I'm thinking, whoa, when you have children in your hand, everything you say is going in if you get them at the right moment. So it's really important to make eye contact and talk in a language that they understand, to sit on their bed and talk to them at the right moment, whatever works for your child. But it's, if you don't give them the guidebook to what's right and wrong in life, they're going to make a lot of mistakes they didn't need to make. I'm quite conscious that some of the families some of the parents listening to this may not be Catholic, and this is not a Catholic story as such. The gentleman on the right there is one of Australia's youngest Catholic priests. But I want to talk about the conversation that his father had with him when he was 7 years of age. he spoke to this group of Year 12 students when he was still in the seminary. So he's actually not a priest in that picture, he's a seminarian. And one of the boys asked him, Daniel, why did you want to become a priest? And he said, when I was 7 years of age, my father said to me, Daniel, why don't you pray every day to discover what you're meant to do in life? And he was a good boy, and I used to see him in the chapel praying each day. And I was thinking to myself, Daniel, it's playtime, go outside and play with your friends. But he knew better than me. He said, when I was 12, I felt this overwhelming sense of peace that I was meant to be a priest, and I've never doubted it since. And it was when he attended Mass in the college. Makes you think, how wise was his father talking to a 7-year-old about what he was going to do in the future of his life? Because it worked. Daniel is now a great young man who's running his own parish in Sydney. Look what John Paul II said about his own father. My father never had to be tough on me. He was so tough on himself. It's about example, but it's also about a father knowing what great responsibility he's got to bring out the best in his own son or daughter. So how are you trying to pass on your most cherished values and convictions? How are you doing that? First of all, do you sit down with your husband or wife and do you think, what are the things we really want to pass on to our kids? Have a family curriculum, if you like. And then one by one, make sure you have those conversations. You won't be sorry. And it's not good enough just to have those conversations. You have to make sure that nobody else is having conversations which are dominating your voice. Look what Aristotle says. He says, we always like best what we first experience. Therefore, it's essential that youth be kept strangers to anything that's bad. Elsewhere, he and Plato both write about how important it is to protect children from scenes in plays, because in ancient Greece, plays were very big, and don't take your children to plays where what they will see will be damaging for them. Well, what would they say about allowing children to watch something on the screen or on Netflix that's going to be bad for them? Got to think this through. It's very big. Inputs, one experience when a child is young can change their life. And that sounds like an exaggeration, but you've had this experience with your own kids. One friend of mine was telling me that his child had one bad experience with floaties, and it means that it's very difficult to get in near the water now. Think about it. What about mistakes? Martin Seligman is the founder of positive psychology. So it's ironic that he's saying let children fail, but it's a very positive thing to let children fail if we make sure that there's a safety net there. A great problem in our society at the moment is a lack of resilience. We know that mental health statistics for young people are dangerously high, and probably higher than they have ever been. He said, children need to fail. We cannot impulsively protect children from failure, because through failure they can learn if they're guided. Remember the book Mindsets that came out a few years ago by Carol Dweck, who's a very well-known psychologist in the States, but very famous. And she says, look, in front of failures and mistakes, there's two possibilities. You can have a mindset which goes to pieces, or you can have a mindset which says, okay, I make a mistake, I'll keep at it. What mindset are you raising with your children in the face of mistakes? Do you get cranky when they make a mistake? If you get cranky when they make a mistake, in the end, they will not be sincere with you. And we'll be talking about that in the next couple of sessions. Sincerity is so important, because if we're not sincere, we can't be sincere, not only with others, but we're not even sincere with ourselves. We don't face the realities about our lives. Oh, this is very sad. We're still talking about sincerity here. That's the motto of Redfield College, and it means the truth will set you free. Do you see in the third word, liberabit, it's in Latin, there's a B, the second B, liberabit. Well, if you change the B to a V, you say veritas vos liberavit, it means the truth used to set you free. And I'm afraid the first time we printed our shield, there was a typo, and we had to pulp the lot because it said the truth used to set you free. It was embarrassing. Why is honesty so important? Because your task as a parent is to raise your sons and daughters to think for themselves and to make choices on what they know to be true. If they make choices on what they feel to be true, it may not be the truth. It may just be their feelings, and it may get them into great problems in life. So honesty is about recognizing the truth, but truth out there, reality, not just truth about feelings. So there's an important dimension to this. You're raising your children in the world. They have to understand what's true in the world and what's bad in the world. And it doesn't mean scaring them. And clearly, if we get that right, then we can help children understand themselves as well. It's very hard to find a picture of a cat smiling, so I hope you appreciate that. But what are we saying here? We're saying that there's something very big at stake here. If you do your very best, you're very diligent as a parent, and you're so diligent that you're stressed all the time, and your kids see that you are stressed, and in the end, that puts a dampener on family life. If your kids feel that you are chronically stressed, or that 80% of the time you're stressed, or 80% of the time you're in a bad temper, what's that going to do? That means that they will say, Mum and Dad, I love you, but your values don't make you happy. I'm sorry, I need values that will make me happy in life. So I can't adopt your values. This is big. What do you do to make sure that your home is bright and cheerful? Well, back each other up as a couple, first of all, so that you give each other feedback. And secondly, I suppose, and this is where I wanted to focus for a couple of slides, just think about the emotion that you are bringing into the family. I know Matt Aldous used to say, when I was working with him in Wallamai, he would always say, the person with the dominant emotion sets the tone in the group. So it's important that the dominant emotion is positive and cheerful. And there's a lot at stake. It just has to be, we have to grapple with this. We did a survey of parents at Redfield at one stage, and we did a survey of the students at Redfield, and what we found was that as the children got older through secondary, their relationship with their parents polarized. And initially, they would blame themselves when they were in trouble. But by the time they were in upper secondary, if a parent lost their temper with their child, or if their parent was chronically impatient or whatever, the child straight away would blame the parents. They'd say they need more self-control. There's something in that. We have to give the right example. We have to relearn to be joyful. And ultimately, what you find joy in will be what your children want, because we want things that make us happy. So we have to make sure that the things that make us happy are the things that we really want to pass on to the children. It's really important. So when you walk in the door at night, you beam when you see your wife, you beam when you see your husband. That's so important. I mean, obviously family relationships and our relationship with God, they're the biggest things we have. So these things have to make us extremely happy. And I don't want to be facile and silly about this, but if most of the time we're not cheerful in family life, we're not teaching kids the right message. So we have to fix our faces. There's nothing for it. We just have to do it. The 200 square centimeters, if you like, of your face, establish the culture in your home. And if you don't manage your face properly, afterwards, your children they will find that your values are inadequate, because they won't make them happy in life. That doesn't mean we don't correct kids, but we correct kids calmly. Every culture knows that children have to be corrected. And it's a great, we betray the child when we don't correct them, but we do it calmly, we do it positively, we make sure the slate is clean so that they can start again. And we'll be talking about this for the next 2 sessions, but good habits are everything. Look what Aristotle says. It makes no small difference if we form habits of one kind or another. It makes a very great difference, all the difference. And habits are virtues. Virtues are not just values. You might have a value of getting up in the morning, but if you just hit the snooze button, that's not a habit. We don't want just values. We want good habits. And in fact, that was Aristotle's great contribution to character education. He understood that qualities of character must be habits. They're not just nice sentiments. And the good thing, of course, if you can teach a dog to drive, you can teach children good habits. And we'll be talking about this in detail, but there are four main, you'll probably recognize that train plus educate at the bottom of that slide. And there are two basic tasks in education. One is to train the emotions, and the second one is to educate the mind. And the two areas we train the emotions are in our impulses towards things that we like, and our fears of things that we don't like, that we have to know how to manage our likes so that we don't go to excess, and we have to know how to manage our fears for a good reason. And we need to educate the mind, not just to make choices, but to make choices based on a deep respect of the rights and needs of others. And that's where empathy and respect come in. But we'll talk more about this next week. Finally, this is a litmus test, isn't it? But if you, what are you going to look back in a decade or two? What are you going to look back and say, yes, thank God we were able to do this successfully with our kids? Did you manage to pass on your values and your deeply held convictions about life? And secondly, did you manage to raise your kids so that they kept loving relationships? So this is big. You've got to make sure that you give your kids really effective guidance in human relationships and give them really effective sexual guidance from an early age, because you don't want to leave this up to somebody at school. It will be a complete mix-up for your child's mind if they just think that sex is about biology. Sex is not just about biology. It's about learning to give oneself to another. We can't be Einsteins in intelligence, but we can be Einsteins when it comes to love. We can learn to give ourselves completely to another. And we've got to make sure that we teach children to do this. Look at that quote from St. John Paul. We cannot live without love. We remain a being incomprehensible for ourselves. Our lives are senseless if love is not revealed to us, if we do not encounter love. We're made for love, in other words, and we have to discover that. That's the New South Wales Treasurer, by the way, Dom Perrottet, meeting Pope Benedict. Dom Perrottet is a Redfield old boy, but it's just marvellous that he leads with his faith. Who's that? That's the Von Trapp family. That's the Sound of Music family. That's the real family, not the movie family. Isn't that marvellous? Anyway, your home is a school of love. That's your ultimate task in parenting, to teach your kids to love with all of their hearts on the basis of truth and reality, not just on the basis of feelings. So ultimately, you have to be the best spouse and parent you can be. That's what it comes back to. Okay, now, what are your take homes? I'm gonna put my video on now. I hope it doesn't completely muck up the feed, and I'll unmute people, or we'll see how we go, and I'll look at the questions that have been posted. We've got about 10 minutes to go, or 15 minutes to go, so we're on track here.
Andy, I have a number.
Sorry, that was not very clear, that one.
I have a number of questions here.
I'm just trying to pull back. I'm trying to pull back the Zoom screen. Just a moment. Sorry. Okay, I think we're in business. Okay, go.
Hi, Andy. I've got a number of questions here.
Yep.
So firstly, there's a question from California.
Whoa.
My sister in California, she said, how do we balance between giving our children a wholesome environment in which to grow up versus raising them in the world with other values and mainstream culture? Should we be protective of our bubble, or should we allow them to interact more freely with people of whose lifestyles may not match our own?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a great question from a really diligent parent. Every home is a protective environment. I think it's fair to say. Are you getting vision from me now or not?
Yes, we are. If you could just stop sharing your screen.
Ah, okay. Stop share. Okay. Good. We're in business. Okay.
Perfect.
Okay. Perfect. Look, every home is a diligent, protective environment, or it should be, because we know how vulnerable young children are if they are exposed to the wrong example, or they're exposed to the wrong friendships or television programs or whatever. So your home is naturally, and it should be, a protective environment. Why are you doing that? Because you're buying time. You're not protecting your kids so that you put them away in a bubble so that they spend their life in a bubble. What you're trying to do is to buy time to give them the criteria so that afterwards they can run their own life. It's interesting in the book that Aristotle gave us, which is about virtue. We call it the Nicomachean Ethics, and it's a book which we think he wrote for his son Nicomachus. There's a chapter in it about friendships, and there's a section in that chapter about sometimes we have to leave friendships because friendships can be bad for us. It doesn't mean necessarily we don't come back to people. We have to be loyal, etc., etc. But if we realize I'm not doing this person any good, all we do is do drugs together or something, then you've got to do something if you think you're going to help the person and help yourself. So I don't think it's a bad thing to be very selective about the friendships that you expose your kids to. At the same time, if you socialize with other families on a family basis, so you're there when the kids are there and you realize what's going on, I think it's very healthy to have many, many friends as a family. So I suppose I'm advocating a middle ground. Don't simply let the kids out and not know what they're up to, but also do make sure that that you're teaching them what it means to be a loyal friend.
Great. I also have a question from Diego Mercier, teacher at Auckland Grammar School. I'm a teacher. How can I, in the school environment, implement this concept of developing character of students through the school curricula and various programs?
That's a really good question. It's interesting that in the Parents for Education schools in Sydney now, we've set up what we call the PARED Academy, Parents for Education Academy. And the purpose of that is to put together endorsed courses for teachers so that they can introduce character education into their schools. So it may be possible in time even to plug in New Zealand schools into this. At the moment, we only have accreditation for New South Wales and Australian schools. But it's the sort of thing that is very practical. The course that I'm teaching at University of Notre Dame in Sydney, it's a week-long intensive course each year, and it's focused specifically for teachers in a master's course on formation of character in the school setting. So possibly the best thing is I'd be very happy to share resources, and if the person who asked that question wants to give you their email address or post it for me, I'd be very happy to respond and share what we've got.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'll put you in touch. Also have another question here. What are some of the things we can do to eliminate issues that arise from a clash of temperaments between the parents and children?
Yeah, and it's a real issue. I don't think I've ever met a teacher who's good with every type of child. Some teachers are good with infants or older kids or sporty kids or music-oriented kids, boys or girls. So what can we do? Well, first of all, we skill ourselves up so that we learn to work most effectively with children of every type. But secondly, mum and dad can help each other, because it's not uncommon that mums, even at a particular age of development, which you've probably seen, that some, mum's better with one child and dad's better with the other. I suppose the important thing is to try to avoid clashing, because if we clash, then it often can undo the good work that's been done. It's very interesting. I was reading a marvelous book recently called A History of Contemporary Ideas, and it just jumped off the page at me that Hegel came up with this idea that he had this theory of change, which is based on the dialectic, that change happens when we have confrontation. And that has seeped into our society so badly. So obviously Marxism is built on that, but we find it in so many other aspects of society. If you've got to jump up and down, you've got to demonstrate, you've got to raise your voice or whatever if you want to have productive change. But in a family, that doesn't work. All it does is alienate people. Doesn't mean we don't have difficult conversations, but we do it with so much affection. And that's
another question here relates to discussing the topic of sex with our children. At what ages should we be discussing this with our children? And the other part of that question is that different for boys and for girls?
That's a really good, really important topic. The best resource that we know of here in Australia is a book written by Gerard O'Shea called As I Have Loved You. And on Vimeo, there is an hour talk with Gerard explaining As I Have Loved You as a way of really effectively educating boys and girls. And it's the wisdom of it is amazing. What he suggests is that, first of all, the book is in a sense a curriculum. It's a very practical curriculum for weekly conversations with a child from the start of puberty right through to about 16. And it's not just about the birds and the bees. It's much, it's a grand scheme of raising children so that they have a complete understanding of life. I would recommend it very strongly, and I'll make sure that those details are available, Jith, for the next gathering.
Fantastic. We have another question here relating to speaking kindly within the home. What are good ways of dealing with rude tone, talking back from a pre-adolescent? And how?
Gee, that's a great question. Two things in my head here. One is we can think that kindness is a bit fluffy and it's a little bit of an added extra. And we must never think that, because what we're going to go into in some detail in a month's time is looking at the virtue of justice, and we'll be looking at how central the way we teach others is to the development of character. The way we deal with others is to the development of character. In so much so that there's a guy called Thomas Licona who is, I think, he's been described as the father of character education. He's a good friend, but he's also a very, very wise man who I've learned a lot from. His most recent book that came out with Penguin was about kindness and teaching kindness to children, but it's not lightweight. It's very, very deep. And he bases a lot of his stuff on the importance of virtue and sort of an Aristotelian approach to virtue as good habits. So I'd recommend his book, and I'll post the title of that as well next time, so that you've got access to that book. But if you Googled Licona, L-I-C-K-O-N-A, Thomas Licona, and if you Google Licona and kindness, you'll come up with the title of that book, which is a recent book that came out about a year and a half ago. And it's full of practical ideas.
Okay. Andy, do you have any questions at your end? Because I've got a few more, but I thought I'd see what you've got as well.
I'm not getting any questions posted to me, so you keep going for your life.
Okay.
I'm sorry, and I apologize for this, but most of the comments that I've had addressed to me are saying basically concern for the connection, but most of those comments seem to finish about 12:15, so I think we got much better connection after that.
Oh yeah, it's been fantastic. So I've got a question from Ziamara. I apologize if I haven't pronounced that correctly. Hello, we have an 11-month-old baby boy. When he is not happy, he bites us. We thought it was teething. We thought about teething, but it wasn't. What should we do?
Gee, I'm out of my depth there, Jith. I reckon you and Nish have got something to say there, mate.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly it's not a deliberate behaviour, but what you don't want, one of the things we're going to look at next time is how even before a child is fully responsible for what they're doing, a child can build up conditionings in the way that they approach actions and interactions with others So certainly part of your task as a parent is to train the right conditionings in your child's responses. And on the basis of that, then they will be much freer, because if they already, you know, we're all the same. If we've been raised from scratch to have a habit of speaking badly about other people, even when we were tiny, or criticizing other people, or using the F word, as we talked about, if we've been allowed to get away with that, then afterwards, when we can take responsibility for our actions, we already have that as a habit. It's a conditioned habit, and it's really hard to shake. It's a brain pathway. So there's a lot of work to be done there, so that kids don't develop habits that are bad for them, even before they can take full responsibility for them. But certainly don't deal with it in a harsh way.
Okay. We've also got this question about, which I think is quite useful for parents of pre-adolescents in particular. What techniques can we use at home to help our children regulate their emotions?
Yeah, good. The sooner, clearly we have the whole box of tricks. So the whole box of tricks can include some punishments, but the punishments certainly should be very appropriate to the crime. So if a person does something that's unkind, they should say sorry and make it up in some way. If in a fit of impulsive crankiness they break something, then they should pay for it, whatever it is, right? So, but what are some of the other techniques that we have to get the best out of kids? By far, the most important thing is that we help them set their own goals. The schools that I've been involved in have had mentoring programs right from year 2, and actually right from earlier, from infants. And the whole purpose of those mentoring programs is to teach children to take responsibility in their own lives. And I think it's really there just to support the parents. But I think effective parents are always doing the same thing. They're helping their children start to set goals for themselves, so that they take responsibility to improve in a certain thing, or to study harder, or to treat their little sister better, or to help more at washing up time, or whatever it is. So keep coming back to this idea that your job is not to overmanage your children. Your job is not to be the helicopter. Your job is not to expect compliance. Your job really is to bring out the best, so that your young person sets their own goals, and you give them all the backup you can so that they set their own goals.
Great. I have another question here from Jed Farrell. What age do you recommend children get devices or cell phones?
Yeah, it's a really good point. You can get smartphones, or you can get dumb phones. I don't think it's very smart. We actually ran a parent function on how it's not smart to give kids smartphones before they have the capacity to self-manage. And what does that mean? If you put a smartphone that's not regulated in the hands of a 12 or a 13 or a 14-year-old kid, and you let them go for broke, well, most kids are normal, and they're going to follow their curiosity, and they're going to get themselves into a lot of sites that will be really bad for them, unless you've really given them that guidance beforehand, and that unless you have a really close relationship with them, so you know where they're going and they are open with you about what they're doing. So I suppose the first thing I'd say is there's a lot of, before you give a child a smartphone, there's years of preparation for that. You have to give them the smartphone at some stage, because in life they're going to have a smartphone, and you won't be able to do that training once they're 17. So there's a lot of work that has to go in when the kids are young about self-regulation and about what's good and bad in the virtual world. But the second thing then is having healthy house rules that we know how to say no to ourselves, so that the kids know how to say no to themselves. So part of that will be the phone stay in a box in the kitchen, but everybody's phone is in the box in the kitchen after 9 o'clock at night or 9:30 at night or something. I mean, maybe there are exceptions to that, but the kids see that you're not asking them to do things that you're not prepared to do yourself. That's the golden rule. And also that, if we don't want the kids to look at their phone at dinner time, then we can't look at our phones at dinner time, etc. So I think between those two strategies, and there's a lot of good material out there on, about this, but please don't put your kids into a situation. Don't set your kids up to fail. Don't give them a phone. I mean, I think a very vivid experience. I called in a father to talk to him because his son had been showing pornography to another child. The boy was year 8, so the boy was about 14 years of age, and I was very firm because I was very concerned that this, that you only get a couple of bites at this, so you really got to make sure that you try to correct the child effectively, and obviously the family correcting the child is the most important thing. The father took the phone off the boy, but then I discovered that the boy had the phone back about 3 weeks later. And I'm thinking, what effective education can you give to a child in 3 weeks that's going to help them use a smartphone after you know that they misused it? And of course, the worst thing there was not the damage he was doing to himself. The worst thing was the damage he was doing to other people. And we've got to inculcate that in a child as well. And, I suppose part of the benefit or sad benefit of being a principal of a school is you get to see the longitudinal effects. And that child just was on a trajectory. So that child left school at year 10. That child was in a sexual relationship with a girl in year 11, and it just went on. And you think, what's going on? Come on, mum and dad. The choices you make when your kids are 12 and 13 are going to affect your kids when they're 15 and 16. So you've got to make the right choices.
Thanks, Andy. We have one more question here from Richard and Rebecca Aldous. And
Richard, Rebecca, hi. I wish I was face-to-face with you.
Hi, Andy.
Hi, mate.
Actually, Richard, why don't you ask the question directly?
Okay, just unmuting. Andy, we're always taught, and we know as parents that all our children are unique and different, and that it is highly appropriate to parent them differently, or according to their personality or temperament.
Yeah.
But obviously, the other children see that at times as grossly unfair and unjust. You got any comments or guidance for us on that?
Yeah, it's a good point. I've seen that also in school context that you have baseline rules, but then every child's different. You have to sometimes cut them more slack or less slack. I suppose that's part of the discussion with the child, that they have to understand that they can't expect privileges where other children don't get equivalent privileges. But it's not easy because we don't want to raise children without the virtual flexibility. The virtual flexibility enables us to give and take a little bit, and to understand that one child may have more sensitivity, so we have to treat them with more sensitivity, and another is thick-skinned. And why do we have these bullying problems in schools? I think part of it is just the thickness of skin problem, that some kids are a lot thinner skinned than others. And does that mean that the thicker skinned child ever has an excuse to treat people badly? No, you can't treat people badly. Sorry, I'm not really answering the question, Rich, except that part of this is to raise kids so that they understand that flexibility is also a virtue, and that we have to deal with each child and each situation in a different way sometimes. It doesn't mean there are not baseline rules. There's a beautiful book called The Four Cardinal Virtues by a guy called Joseph Pieper, who's a philosopher. I was talking about this in the university group one, and one of the kids in the group said, "Hey, no, it's not Joseph Pieper, it's Justin Bieber." No, it's not Justin Bieber, it's Joseph Pieper. And Joseph Pieper talks about the virtue of prudence, and he says that the virtue of prudence, only the person making the decision really is in the right place to make that decision. They're the only ones who have all the facts. So we've got to be a little bit cautious about being totally rule-based. Virtue education is different to rule-based education, although it uses rules. And I think we have to keep teaching kids to put people first, not rules first. And then maybe we can make some ground on that.
Fantastic. So I think we'll wrap things up there. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you very much, Andy, for taking the time to prepare this talk and give it to us. We're very privileged, and this is one of the few good things about COVID-19 has been that it's in some ways has made this world a little bit smaller, and we're able to have you do this for us. In terms of everyone's questions, there are some other questions that we haven't addressed today, but please send your questions in, even if you have some questions that come up in the next few days. Please send them through to the FENZ account so that we can relay them through to Andy for the next session. And also, if you have any questions relating to the next topic, which will be the next section in the book, you can send them up front and we will relay them to Andy, and that way we can have them figure highly on the list of questions for the next time. And finally, a reminder that the next session is on Sunday, the 30th of August at the same time.
Jith, I'm very happy for you to give my email address to people if they want to send questions to me directly, no problem.
Okay.
And also, I think we now have a system that will be able to avoid our first 15-minute problems that we had. I'll simply be doing this from the room closest to the modem. So I don't expect that we'll have the same problems next time. But by all means, send me feedback if you have any questions about what I said that it wasn't clear. I'm most happy to answer them personally as well.
Great.
Jith, thanks a lot, mate.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Bye.
Good on you. All the best, eh?
Cheers. Thanks, Andy.
Good on you.